Discover the Arts is brought to you by Nevada Dairymen and Dairy Council of Nevada and Estelle J. Kelsey Foundation.
Hey everyone, my name is Andy Butter and we're going to be talking about poetry today. A little bit about me first. I teach and go to school here at the University of Nevada, Reno, studying creative writing, specifically poetry, and that ultimately led me to here to be talking with you all about poetry today. So what we're going to be doing is two separate exercises that will get us writing and thinking about poetry and ultimately leave you with two poems that you can walk away with, that you can call your own. So before we start doing that, I want to talk about what makes up an interesting poem. There's a lot of things that go into poems, but for today we're going to talk about three things specifically. And what I see as being very interesting in poems and what makes your poem are images, metaphors, and statements. So we're going to talk a little bit more about each of those. So a metaphor, you may have heard this word before, but it's when you compare two different things to each other to create kind of a new meaning with them. And you might recognize them if you hear the word like or as. That's usually a signal that a metaphor is happening. So like I mentioned, it's two separate things compared to each other. So an example of that would be her eyes are like the ocean. Right, so the two things being compared there are eyes and oceans, which, as we all know, are two very different things. Eyes are in our face, they're smaller, and we use them to see, and oceans are huge and cover the surface of the planet, right? But what new meaning might be created by comparing those two things? Well, for example, saying her eyes are like the ocean might be implying that they're blue, or that they're nice to look at, or that they contain deep, deep mysteries, for example. So you'll notice that metaphor includes the word like, right? So her eyes are like the ocean. Another one, just an example, might be his smile is big as the sky, right? So we know smiles aren't the sky. They're on our faces and they're not as big as the sky. But by using the word as and creating a metaphor, we can kind of create new meaning. So keep that in mind. That's something that's in poems and that we'll be writing today are metaphors. The second thing is images. So images, typically we think of images as videos or photos, but in terms of poetry, images can be any of the five senses, really. Anything you hear, see, smell, taste, or touch in poetry can be an image, right? So usually coming up with images is as easy as looking around you and seeing what you're seeing right now, or smelling, or touching, or tasting, right? So an example would be the wind smells like sage, right? In poetry, that's an image because we get a specific kind of sense there. We'll be writing some of those later. And the third thing are statements. So what can be so powerful about poetry and make poetry so unique to the person writing it is that you say how you believe the world is by just making these big assertions, which in poetry, you don't really have to back up with evidence or anything. You can kind of just say, which is great. So that might look like, I believe giraffes should be president, or I believe buses should be free, right? You can be as silly as you want or as serious as you want. You don't really have to make sense. You can just state things that you believe. All right, so we have images, we have metaphors, and we have statements. All right, so I want you to write your four images, 4 statements, and 4 metaphors, and they should all come out on their own separate scrap of paper. I have mine here. When you're done, you should have 12. So I'm going to go ahead and give you time to do that. So go ahead and press pause and write your 12 images, statements, and metaphors on your piece of paper, and we can start up after. Now that you have your separate scraps of paper with our images, metaphors, and statements, we're going to look at another poem to help us put this poem together with all these different scraps we have. So this poem is by Juan Felipe Herrera. He's the former poet laureate of the United States of America, and he has this poem called Social Distancing, which I thought was appropriate for today. I'm going to read it to you and talk about it a little bit, and then we'll get into how it's going to help our poems. All right. Grocery bags have a tendency to wobble. You can crash into the toy section. Flaring stars create another star. The basketball will dunk you up. Blushing will take you down. A chili bowl will wreak havoc by itself. Freedom blossoms in all colors. The power between us is magnificent. Peace opens, rises, and accelerates. Fear dissolves and trust walks in. Your tenderness opens its door. Love flourishes for the first time. Healing begins. All right, so we have our poem, and this poem is what we call a concrete poem, meaning that it's not shaped, or it doesn't look like how we typically think poems look like, right? Like all on one side and kind of a square. This poem looks like a sun ray or a clock face. So kind of something in the middle and then 12 lines coming out of it, right? So this is what I want you to do. I want you to take your 12 lines that you have and array them in whatever order you feel fit. Kind of imagine each line is an hour on a clock, right? So 1 o'clock, go here, 2, 3, 4, 5, until you have all of your lines in an order that you feel works for you. And once you have all of those lined up, then in Juan's poem, there's a final 13th line that we haven't talked about yet, but I'll leave, once you have all your 12 lines in the correct order that you want, then write that final last line right in the smack dab middle of your clock. And that can be one word, that can be 2 words, that can be a whole sentence, whatever you feel works best for you, but I'll leave that up to you. All right, so what we're going to do with our scraps now, remember we have 4 images, we have 4 metaphors, and we have 4 statements. We're going to arrange them similar to Juan's poem, which is to make them look like a clock. So each one of your lines, each one of your scraps of paper that you've cut out can look like 1 hour on the clock. So we'll have 1 o'clock, for example, 2 o'clock, 3, each hour being a different line that you've written. There's a 13th line in Juan's poem. The very last one you might remember says healing begins. And we haven't written that yet. But what I want you to do is to arrange your poem in the lines that make sense to you. And these are scraps, so feel free to move them around as you see fit. If one's over here, but you think it makes more sense over here, feel free to move those around as much as you need. Once you have those all in place, then you can write that final last line, the 13th line, and that can be 1 word, that can be 2 words, that can be a whole sentence, however much you want, and then your poem will be complete. All right, so I'll give you time to do that. So press pause on this video now, and once you're ready, we'll press play and get moving on into the next exercise. All right, so for our second exercise, we're going to be doing what's called an erasure or a blackout poem. And the way this works is you have any sort of writing, whether it's in like a newspaper or it's in an advertisement or an old book. And what you do is you take either a pencil or a pen or a Sharpie and you cross out all the words that you don't want in there. And what happens is you're left with a handful of other words that kind of create their own meaning or what we could call a poem, right? So for example, I have here a news article about a software company, something I'm not terribly interested in, but it has a lot of interesting words that I want to highlight. So before we get started, find any piece of writing that you want to mark up. Make sure to ask if it's okay if you mark it up. Ask your parent or guardian if you can scratch stuff out and write over it before getting started. And it's as simple as taking your writing utensil and just crossing out any word you don't want. And what happens is you're left with an entirely new poem inside those lines. When you're doing this, don't worry about making sense. Just focus on keeping the words that you're most interested in, that sound the best to you, or that really jumped out to you when you were reading it, or someone was reading it to you. and see what you come up with. So remember to ask permission first before you start writing in a book. And remember, you don't have to make sense. And remember to have fun. All right, so after you've written your clock poem or your erasure, whichever one of those is your favorite, feel free to send those along to us at outreach@arttown.org. And you might even see your poem up on the Facebook page there. But thanks for joining me today. I hope you keep writing in any way you see fit, and have a great day.
Be sure to check out Discover Sock Puppets if you haven't already. And now, a message from our sponsors.
Discover the Arts is brought to you by Nevada Dairymen and Dairy Council of Nevada and Estelle J. Kelsey Foundation.
Welcome back, guys. Oh, hey! Do you guys have a bunch of mismatched socks laying around? Well, today I'm going to show you what to do with those. We are going to learn how to make 2 different kinds of sock puppets. So we are going to need, of course, socks. We are going to need scissors, markers, a rubber band if you have it, googly eyes if you've got those laying around, pom-poms maybe, colored markers, and then possibly glue. So push pause on that video, get all your things ready, and I'm going to show you how to make these sock puppets. Okay, so I'm going to teach you how to do a traditional sock puppet first. And all we need is a tube sock for this one. So I'm going to use this black tube sock. I'm going to cut about 1 inch up from the tube, just that loop, just like that. And then with that loop, I'm going to cut it in half like that. So I made a lamb for the first one, but maybe I'll make a dog for this one. So I'm going to take this strip and cut it into an oval, a pretty long oval. So we're making the dog's ears. Like that. Okay, so now we've got the ears. We can set these aside. Put the tube sock onto your hand and then take the toe of the sock and push it towards your palm. That way you have a little mouth on him. Now we need to decide where those ears are gonna go. So I think the ears would look nice here. I'm gonna take a marker, make 2 little dots. Take the tube sock off and have your parents help you cut 2 small holes right into that sock. Okay. Then we're gonna take that oval that we cut out and we're gonna lace it through the sock, through one side of that hole, and out the other side. Just like that. Now my dog has got some floppy ears. Perfect. Now it's time to decorate it. So I'm going to do googly eyes on this guy just because we won't be able to see the marker on the black. So I'm going to take one of my googly eyes, glue that there. Great. And then I'm going to take one of these pink pom-poms and make my dog a little nose. Let's see. I think the nose goes about there. And it is that simple to make yourself a little dog sock puppet. Alrighty, so do you guys want to learn how to make an octopus sock puppet next? Alrighty. So what we're gonna need is another tube sock, and we are going to bunch up that tube sock and put it into a second tube sock, just like that. That's gonna be the head of our octopus. And then we're gonna take a rubber band or a hair tie, whatever you have lying around at home. And you're tying that rubber band right underneath the head of the octopus. Just like that. Next, we're going to take our scissors and do 7 cuts to make our tentacles. Two. I've got 3 legs, 2 legs. This might be a good time for a time lapse since I messed that part up. Alrighty, now we've got the body of an octopus. And again, since he's black, I'm going to put a little bit of googly eyes on him just so we can see his eyes. Yep, I think that's gonna do it for that guy. For those of you who didn't use black socks and don't have googly eyes, it is perfectly okay to use your markers to decorate the face on this. So I think I'm going to do blue eyes on my octopus. And maybe even give him a smile so he doesn't look so ghost-like. Can even color in suction cups on his tentacles. The decorating part is completely up to you. But now that you know how to make 2 types of puppets, it is time to put on your own sock puppet production. Have fun, guys, and thank you so much for watching another Discover the Arts workshop.